I walked away that morning thinking I'd made my point. I thought I'd proven something to myself. Something about boundaries, about not being the kid who hangs around when he knows he shouldn't. But the second I turned the corner, I felt it, like she'd left a whisper of herself in the air behind me. And somehow she had. I wasn't even supposed to be here. The repair shop smelled like hot metal and motor oil, the kind of place where everything has a job and nothing asks for attention. I was just waiting for my bike, trying not to fidget, counting the scratches along the wall as if they had some secret code. That's when I saw her. She was crouched over a pile of invoices at the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair just brushing her shoulders in that effortless way she somehow managed. I caught her glance out of the corner of my eye, the kind that lingers a second too long, like she's deciding whether to let you in or keep you out. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But there was this curve in her lips, subtle, almost smug, like she already knew something I didn't. I cleared my throat and tried to focus on my phone, scrolling aimlessly, but I could feel her eyes tracking me. Not in a creepy way. Not that kind of stare. It was aware, like she could read a page in me without me ever opening my mouth. When she stood, her boots made a faint click against the concrete floor. She walked over, holding a tiny cup of coffee, and placed it beside my bike without a word. My fingers twitched against the handlebars. Thanks, I muttered, embarrassed, because why would she care if I had coffee or not? She tilted her head, eyebrow raised slightly, and there was a pause long enough for me to wish the floor would swallow me whole. Busy day? She asked finally, voice calm but layered, like there were dozens of things hidden under the words. I shrugged, because how do you answer that without sounding like you're floundering? Sort of, I said. Bike acting up again. She nodded, leaning on the counter, arms crossed loosely. Figures. It's never just one thing, is it? Her voice had this way of landing in the space between us, filling it without crowding. And I noticed the faint scent of vanilla and something sharper I couldn't name. My chest tightened. Then, out of nowhere, she laughed. Not a full laugh, just a short, precise sound that made me realize how tense I'd been, how stupidly I'd tried to walk away to make a point. She didn't laugh at me, exactly, but with me. And I hated that I felt something crack open in my chest I hadn't expected. I tried to meet her eyes when she leaned forward to jot something on the clipboard. Her hair fell forward just enough to brush her cheek. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to push it behind her ear, to watch her look at me then, really look. I shook my head, annoyed with myself, and turned to my bike, pretending the throttle and chain had my full attention. But I knew it was a lie. Because when she stepped back and the sun caught her hair just right, I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. And I swear, for a heartbeat, she looked at me and knew it. Knew I'd already lost this round, before anything even started. I walked out thinking I had control, but I couldn't stop thinking about the tilt of her head, the quiet, deliberate way she made her coffee gesture, the way she had somehow, impossibly, made me notice her without even trying. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I'd be back. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon enough. Because one small glance had said more than words ever could, and I couldn't shake it. I didn't mean to linger in her world again, but when the phone call came, her voice clipped and polite, asking if I could swing by to help move a stubborn piece of furniture at the studio. I found myself saying yes before I could stop myself. The room smelled faintly of paint and lemon polish, and sunlight slanted through the half-closed blinds, throwing stripes across the floor. She was crouched over a canvas, pencil tucked behind her ear, sleeves rolled up just past her elbows. Even in casual clothes, she carried a kind of authority that made me self-conscious about every careless movement I made. "Careful with that," she said, stepping back as I tried to lift a heavy easel. Her voice was steady, but there was a small edge to it, like she was testing me, gauging how much I'd notice, how much I'd respect the space she'd carved out for herself. "I've got it," I said, grinning to cover the way my arms shook. She didn't smile back. Instead, she moved toward the window, adjusting the blinds with precise fingers. And I noticed them, her hands, slender, with faint calluses at the fingertips, evidence of her work. They were beautiful, but strong, and somehow entirely hers. She leaned against the windowsill, letting out a small sigh, almost imperceptible. I hesitated, unsure if she wanted it noticed. "Long day?" I asked, softer than I intended. Her eyes flicked toward me, just for a moment, guarded. Something like that. She kept her voice neutral, but the crease between her brows betrayed it. Tiredness, maybe, or frustration, maybe both. I didn't press. I just nodded, letting the silence hang, thick and slightly electric. When I turned back to the easel, she laughed, short, almost self-deprecating, as if she couldn't believe I'd managed it without dropping it. My chest tightened. Every small sound she made felt loaded, as though she had no idea how much I noticed, how much I wanted to memorize it. At one point, she brushed past me to adjust a canvas, and our shoulders barely touched. I felt the faint warmth of her coat sleeve against my arm and froze, though I tried not to. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate, but something in the way she shifted, the slightest tilt of her body, made it impossible to ignore the tension stretching between us. I caught her looking at me once, from the corner of her eye, as if weighing something she'd rather not say. I didn't know what it was, approval? Annoyance? Curiosity? I only knew my stomach flipped anyway. We worked in near silence after that, moving canvases, straightening frames, adjusting small things no one would ever notice but us. I noticed everything. The slight tremor in her fingers when she thought no one was watching. The faint line of fatigue beneath her eyes. How she tucked stray hair behind her ear with a careful precision, almost ritualistic. As she stood back, surveying the room, I leaned against the doorway, pretending to stretch, watching her. And she glanced at me. Just a quick, fleeting look. But in it, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw something soft. Something almost vulnerable. Then she turned, and the moment evaporated like steam. I was left with the memory of it, the faint brush of her sleeve, the warmth that lingered far longer than it should have. And I realized I hadn't breathed for the past 10 minutes. I didn't know if she felt it too, but I knew I wouldn't be able to forget. The rain started softly at first, a whisper against the windows, and by the time I reached her apartment, it had turned into a steady drum, tapping insistently on the glass. She didn't have an umbrella, which I noticed immediately. The way she stood by the door, hair damp at the ends, arms crossed loosely over her chest, waiting for me to step inside. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, a mix that somehow felt safe and intimate at once. We were both quiet, moving around each other with that careful rhythm you have when someone is close enough to touch, but you don't yet know if you should. She handed me a towel without meeting my eyes. "You're soaked," she said, voice soft but clipped, like she was holding something back. I could have teased her, joked, tried to break the tension, but I didn't. I just accepted the towel, letting the fabric brush against my hair, noticing the faint scent of her perfume lingering even after the air had shifted. As I dried off, she leaned on the counter, watching me, and I realized she looked tired, more than usual. Her gaze lingered just a second too long, as if she were thinking of something she shouldn't say. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Some things weren't mine to pry. We moved to the small kitchen for coffee, the storm outside filling the pauses between our words. The conversation was light at first. Books, music, the neighbor's dog. But the silence that followed was charged, almost dangerous. My hand brushed hers as I reached for the sugar. Neither of us pulled away immediately. I caught her looking at me, something like hesitation in her eyes, but she quickly averted her gaze. I swallowed, remembering all the warnings I'd given myself. The age difference, the professional boundaries, the unspoken rules we were skirting, and still, I wanted to reach for her hand again, just to see if she would let me. A sudden vibration on the counter startled us. She glanced at her phone and frowned. "It's nothing." But I saw the flash of something, annoyance, guilt, maybe even relief, before she slipped her phone back into her pocket. I wanted to ask more, press her, but something held me back. That restraint, the one she carried so naturally, was contagious. The rain outside intensified, rattling the windows, making the apartment feel smaller, more intimate. She leaned closer to stir her coffee, the steam curling up between us, and I thought, maybe just for a second, if I reached out, if I dared, I could touch her shoulder without consequence. But then she shifted, straightening, breaking the moment. A flash of vulnerability, gone. A shared secret, unspoken. I stayed still, pretending to check the sugar, pretending not to notice the way my chest had tightened, the way my fingers itched to bridge the space between us. And yet, in that quiet, storm-filled kitchen, I felt it. The pull, the almost, the possibility of something that shouldn't happen but wanted to. My hand hovered a heartbeat too long above hers, trembled slightly, and then I let it drop. I walked away from that almost touch with my chest tight, my thoughts running wild, and the storm outside seemed to echo everything I wasn't allowed to say. But I couldn't stop remembering the look in her eyes as she stirred her coffee. That single, fragile second had changed everything. We were sitting on the small balcony, the city lights below hazy through the lingering drizzle. The air smelled faintly of wet concrete and her faint perfume, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this exposed, this raw, without her actually touching me. She lit a cigarette, the flame brief in the dark, and inhaled slowly. I didn't ask for one, didn't even think about it. I just watched her, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly around the paper tube. She blew smoke into the night, and it curled between us, carrying with it something unsaid. I wanted to say something. I wanted to break the tension, to speak before the moment passed. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Instead, she looked at me, the kind of look that made me feel like she could see everything I was trying not to admit. Finally, she spoke, voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you ever wonder what this is?" I frowned. "What this is?" "The us," she said, and I could hear the weight behind the words, the careful deliberation. She looked away for a second, then back, eyes glimmering in the dim light. "I mean, we can't pretend it's normal, can we?" I swallowed. I wanted to argue, to brush it off, but I couldn't. The truth had been creeping along the edges for weeks, threading itself into every glance, every silence. "No," I admitted finally, voice quiet. "We can't." She took a long drag, exhaling slowly, and I realized how tired she looked. Not just physically, but in the kind of way you can't fake. A weariness that comes from holding back what you want, from running constant calculations in your mind. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she could let go, but the words felt impossible. We fell into a silence that stretched, heavy and deliberate, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional drip of water from the balcony above. I tried to read her, to find some clue in the way she held herself, the way her legs were pulled close to her body, the way her eyes darted to mine before quickly looking away. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered finally, almost to herself, almost afraid to be heard. "I don't know where this ends, or if it even has an ending." I stayed quiet. There was nothing I could say that would make it better, nothing that would make the pull between us any less dangerous or confusing. I just watched her, memorizing the way her lips parted slightly when she spoke, the tremor in her hand as she set the cigarette down, the faint frown that had creased her forehead without her noticing. The night stretched on, and I realized she had stripped away all pretense. All the small, careful boundaries we'd tried to keep in place were gone. In their place was something raw, something that felt like truth, even if it terrified both of us. Then she turned to me, voice breaking just enough for me to hear it, and said the line I knew I'd carry with me for weeks. "I think I might be falling apart, and I don't know if I can stop it." And for the first time, I understood that nothing between us would ever be the same again. I was leaning against the counter, pretending to sort through a stack of invoices, when she picked up a small photo frame from the edge of her desk. It was old, corners worn, and she held it like it might crumble if she touched it too hard. "I haven't looked at this in years," she murmured, voice tight, almost unsteady. She turned it toward me just enough for me to see a younger version of herself, smiling beside someone I didn't recognize. Her eyes lingered on the photo, distant, almost haunted. "Who's this?" I asked softly, careful not to overstep. Her fingers tightened around the frame. He was someone I thought I'd spend my life with." She paused, swallowing, and for the first time I noticed the way her throat moved, the slight hitch that made her seem fragile, human in a way she rarely let herself be. Until I didn't. I nodded, unsure what to say. There was a quiet gravity to her confession, a stillness that demanded I just listen. "I'm sorry," I said finally, even though I didn't know what else to offer. She shook her head, a small, ironic smile flickering across her face. "No, it's not your fault. It's just part of who I am now." Her eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, I saw the weight she carried, how much of her past had been folded into every careful boundary, every smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wanted to say something stupidly reassuring, like I understood, like I could fix it with words, but the truth was I couldn't. All I could do was watch her, notice the subtle tremor in her hand as she set the photo down, the way her lips pressed together as if to hold back some other memory, the quiet exhale that seemed to release part of her grief into the room. Then, without thinking, I remembered a story she'd once told me about a letter she never sent, about someone she lost, someone who had slipped away because of timing, fear, circumstance. I mentioned it softly, almost a whisper. "You told me about the letter once, the one you never sent. Maybe it's still here somewhere." Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw something crack open. Not anger, not relief, exactly, just recognition. She leaned back, rubbing a hand across her face, and muttered, "I forgot that existed. I forgot. I forgot how much it hurt." We both stayed quiet after that, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, because some truths are too heavy for words. I could feel the weight of her past pressing into the space between us, fragile but undeniable. And I realized, with a sort of quiet awe, that she had chosen to share this with me. Not because I asked, not because it was convenient, but because she trusted me enough to let me see her scars. When she finally looked at me again, eyes soft but guarded, she let out a barely audible sigh. "I don't even know why I showed you that." I shrugged, smiling faintly. "Maybe because it needed to be seen." She laughed, small and uneven, shaking her head, and for a fleeting moment, the tension that had always been there, the caution, the restraint, shifted. Something trembled in the room, fragile, seismic, and I realized I was already carrying a piece of her heartbreak with me. And somehow, that made everything feel closer, yet impossibly farther away, all at the same time. We were in her studio again, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, dust motes drifting lazily in the light. The room smelled faintly of paint and old wood, of the small rituals she'd built around herself to keep the world at bay. I sat on the edge of the couch, her sketchbook open between us, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. She looked up at me finally, eyes calm but unguarded, the kind of gaze that could pierce through all pretense without demanding anything in return. "You've been patient," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "More than I deserved." I shook my head. "I don't think patience has much to do with it. I wanted to be here, even if it's complicated." My fingers brushed against the edge of the sketchbook, tracing faint pencil lines without thinking. She closed the book slowly, setting it aside. "Complicated is putting it lightly," she said, and for a moment I could see the weight of years in the curve of her shoulders, the slight slump that came from holding back feelings she didn't think she could afford to feel. I leaned back, letting the tension fall between us. No jokes, no bravado, no words that pretended this was anything less than real. I watched her as she moved to adjust the blinds, her hand brushing against mine for a brief second, a fleeting touch that made my chest catch. Neither of us flinched. Neither of us pulled away. For a long time, we just existed in the same space, our shared silence speaking more than any confession could. I noticed the faint crease beneath her eye, the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, the warmth of her presence so close it was almost a weight. And I realized that the walls we'd both built, careful, necessary, were no longer as solid. "You don't have to say anything," she said finally, voice low, almost afraid to fill the quiet. "I don't need words to know." I nodded, letting the words settle, because I knew she was right. I didn't need to say I cared. I didn't need to explain what had been building between us for weeks, months, maybe longer. It was in the small things, the shared glances, the silences that stretched just long enough to make the heart race, the moments of trust and vulnerability we hadn't dared to name. And then, without thinking, our hands touched again. This time not fleetingly, not by accident. Fingers intertwined, tentative but deliberate, and I felt a quiet finality in that connection, as if it had been inevitable all along. She let out a breath, not nervous, not rushed, just steady, and I matched it. We leaned slightly toward each other, foreheads almost touching, sharing the same space without forcing it into anything it wasn't ready to be. The sun slipped lower, casting long, lazy shadows across the floor, and I realized I wasn't thinking about boundaries, or age, or past heartbreaks. I wasn't even thinking about the future. I was just here, and somehow, in that simple, fragile acknowledgement, it was enough. We stayed like that, hands linked, foreheads near, in a silence that felt full, complete, and real. Not perfect, not dramatic, not a fairy tale, but ours. And for the first time, I knew that whatever came next, it would be earned, and it would be true. It's been months since that day in her studio, yet I can still remember the quiet weight of her hand in mine, the faint tremor in her fingers that gave everything away. I remember the way the sun fell across the floor, painting stripes over us, and how it felt like the world had slowed just long enough for us to exist in a moment that was ours alone. Since then, things haven't been perfect. They've been real. We've argued, stumbled over miscommunications, and learned the hard edges of each other's hearts. But we've also laughed, lingered over coffee until it went cold, and discovered the quiet thrill of sharing space without pretense. I notice the small things now, how she brushes a strand of hair behind her ear when she's deep in thought, the faint crease that appears on her forehead when she's puzzled, the soft sigh when she finally admits she's tired but keeps going anyway. And I notice the changes in myself, too. The way I breathe slower around her, the way I think before speaking because I want my words to carry weight, not just noise, the way I've learned to sit in silence without feeling the need to fill it. Love, I've realized, isn't always fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes, it's the quiet acknowledgement that you're holding someone's fragile pieces in your hands, and that they're holding yours, too. Sometimes, it's the subtle electricity of fingers brushing in passing, of shared looks across a room, of understanding that doesn't need to be spelled out. She's changed, too, in ways I didn't think possible. She's softer, not in weakness, but in allowing herself to be seen. She laughs more freely, lets me in just a little closer each day, and trusts the space between us to hold more than silence. It holds possibility. I sometimes catch myself staring at her, not in longing, not in obsession, but in quiet gratitude that we stumbled into each other's worlds at all. That the small, tentative touches, the near misses, the long conversations, and the unspoken tensions all led us here. To this place where we can just exist together without needing to define every feeling. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know where this path will take us, or how long we'll walk it side by side. But I know this. I am better for knowing her. I am sharper, more patient, more aware of what it means to care for someone deeply without rushing or forcing it. And I think, in some small way, she feels the same about me. We've learned, painfully and beautifully, that love isn't a climax. It's a series of quiet moments, earned and fragile, that accumulate until they feel inevitable. That's the beauty of it. That's the danger. And somehow that's enough. So here I am, sitting in the apartment that's no longer just hers or mine but ours, thinking about the small miracles of shared silence, fleeting touches, and the patience it takes to build something real. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?